Hi, my name is Abby Bird. Just to put a name to a face, I just recently graduated from Baker with a degree in finance and accounting, and I had the opportunity to take this MBA course and play basketball again, so that's kind of what I'm doing. The article I chose was from the Multidisciplinary Digital Publishing Institute. And the article was the perspective on COVID-19 pandemic factors impacting organizational leadership. I kind of chose this because at my internship the other day, my boss wanted some feedback on how we think that remote learning works and how it affects like the relationships we create with each other. And some of the things mentioned, firstly, was trust, which is like one of the most important factors that's mentioned a lot of times throughout our book. In the article, they said that the leadership, character, and actions lead to an employee's willingness to trust that leader. Leaders have to be responsible for the organizations by establishing trust, collaborating, and sharing leadership to increase the organization's ability to survive during the time of crisis. Obviously, COVID was a huge unexpected disruptor that shocked everyone. And if there was already a lack of trust or anything like that, it was just going to make it a lot harder. And any lack of trust would have just led to kind of like no respect or things along those lines. The book mentions a lot about trust too. It's mentioned like constantly. I know it was mentioned in the first chapter as something that leaders have to make, and then like further throughout the book, that like where we are now, it talked about interpersonal trust and just the trust within yourself to be a leader. And I really like the focus on trust because I think it does have a lot of definitions. Secondly, mentioned in this article is what they call a communal relationship. And they explain that as a relationship between friends or family members. This relationship leads people to feel responsible for others' welfare. They want to help them when they're in need without the expectation of return and have positive attitudes supporting one another. Communal relationships are essential for a collaborative and effective workforce. There's no like sense of payback needed by anyone. You genuinely want to work for the people you're working with. I kind of compared this to the book. The idea of communal relationships is given in the book under, I think it was last week, we went over relations-oriented leader behaviors. And some of the behaviors that we looked at were the supporting behaviors such as bolstering self-esteem and confidence, being willing to help them with personal matters, and kind of taking a very empathetic side to the people you're working with and taking their problems and truly listening to them. And then in my personal opinion, when a person feels supported and cared for, they will want to put forth good work and therefore benefiting the team. Lastly, what they mentioned was the social exchange relationship. And this requires a comparable benefit between a giver and a recipient. This makes sense as the relationship between employees and their organization often includes some type of cost-benefit evaluation. The author in this article, Chen, gave the example that if employees receive support in the workplace, there will most likely be less turnover, or if employees are compensated well, they will feel valued. These types of social exchange relationships are more short-term than communal relationships. However, employees will most likely feel a stronger sense of loyalty to their company if trust has been established and concern is demonstrated. I also linked this to the relations-oriented part of our book. They talked about subordinate skills, and these were kind of showing like a genuine interest in the people on your team. Like if you are the leader, showing a genuine interest in like promoting their name and kind of putting them out there. And then just to go off that, to give a real world example, We learned about this today in my internship, and it was kind of the difference between a mentorship and a sponsorship. And I didn't really know there was a difference, and I'm sure some of you who have been in the workforce for longer have like heard of this, but it kind of defined a mentorship as just like someone who is there for you when you need it. But a sponsorship is someone who is gonna put your name out there and advocate for you to move up in the company, which I think is a pretty cool idea. And I didn't even know there was a difference. And that is what this kind of reminded me of. And then the last key that the article mentions is the emphasis on decision making. And this is one that you kind of like hear about a lot. Obviously when COVID-19 came, it was like a huge, like everyone was depending on their leader to make a decision, stick with it, have clear information provided for them. So I think that was like definitely a true test for a leader. The book also mentions this a bunch of times. And they mention on page 74 that decisions are often informal and adaptive. And I think that's kind of what COVID was, because they had to adapt to that situation. And I think a lot of people did a really good job. But I also think that leaders now, and this is kind of what my boss was asking us about, is like what to do now. Like how should we carry forward when it's not like the government setting guidelines or the business or like the CEO setting the guidelines. Like it's your individual boss who gets to make the decision, like if we're coming in as a team or if we're not. And I think part of being a leader that just like kind of made me think in my head after reading this article is like finding what'll work best for your team. Because I think that's a huge part of leadership too, is understanding your team and working with them. I really appreciated my boss asking us that today and giving us the option. And she wanted to know what would work for us, which I thought was pretty cool. We also talked about kind of the relationships being built. And I just think part of work, at least for me, because obviously you spend a lot of time there, so you want to enjoy it. So the people are really important to me. So kind of that's what this article covered a little bit, is how relationships might not be able to be built as good over the internet. And that's definitely something I appreciate about my internship, is how close I've gotten and having people to be there when I need a question answered. Yeah, so just in conclusion, we went over communal relationships, trust, decision-making, and social exchange relationships, which is a term I hadn't really heard of before, but I am excited to hear more about and possibly dive into mentorships and sponsorships. So thank you guys for listening, and I'd be interested to hear your opinions on maybe like going back to work or staying remote. So thank you guys.